Thank you for coming on a Sunday morning. I'm going to try to wake you up with the most difficult topic. It's software. I don't know how you get someone awake with software, but I'm going to try to tell a story that you'll probably, hopefully find interesting. So my name is Stefanos, I'm from Greece. I'm a programmer doing web programming mostly. And my talk is called A Balanced Give and Take. So I'm going to talk about open source software, which I'm working in and is also my hobby. And I'm going to tell you why there is lots that I've given into that and what I've also taken out of that. And in my mind there is a balance there, so I'm going to just tell you where that balance comes from. I need to start with a question. Who doesn't know what open source software is? Okay, you can leave now. No, so open source software is in a very short form is software that the license to use it, modify it and redistribute it, give it on, pass it on, puts no restrictions. It's the opposite of closed source, which is what software like Microsoft Windows, Mac OS, the Office suite that we use. All of these are closed source software. You need to pay money to get the license to use the software, and that license does not allow you to change the software and pass it on to someone else. The opposite thing is open source software. It's highly relevant in 2024 in Switzerland. I'm going to pass this on. It's from the Bundeskanzlei, the Federal Chancellery, and it has become mandatory for public services that develop software. It has become mandatory to publish it as open source. This is now a very new law. It I think it was at work since last year, and very recently it has become a mandate from the government. If it's a public service that's developing software, it has to be open source. I'm gonna use that so you can pass it around. I have highlighted the part that actually gives the definition of open source. The rest of the pages, the first page is the definition of open source. The rest of the pages is my public online profile from the open source project I work with, which is called Drupal. But first of all, that's what open source software is. It has been around for a while. It has been around since the 70s, which was a very exciting decade. And some of the thoughts about revolution and anti-commercialism flowed into the software community. So there were lots of hackers in that time that thought that software should be free. Anybody can access it, modify it, use it as they want, and pass it on without any licensing or restrictions. So at that time, the Free Software Foundation was founded, mostly backed by academia, which had less restrictions than industry. So Berkeley University in California pushed that a lot, and the Free Software Foundation came out of people that were involved in that community, and they started funding and supporting the development of free software. Time went by, the 80s went by, Microsoft came to be, Apple came to be, personal computers came to be, and they became a consumer product. Not very expensive, and with time even less expensive, so we all became potential customers of personal computers. But we had to get a license to use them, because the most important piece of software is the operating system. That's Mac OS, Microsoft Windows, and some of you may know Unix and Linux is another operating system that's available. Linux became available in the beginning of the 90s. It was a huge change, because finally this community of hackers were able to use their personal computers using an open source license-free operating system. And that was a huge change, so much so, because at the same time there was another revolution happening, and it started not far from here. It started in Geneva in CERN. It was the internet and the World Wide Web, which allowed anyone to generate context, hyperlink it, and share it online. So suddenly people got interconnected. And that allowed the creation of communities, or the better linkage of communities, and that made open source software communities much more effective. So in a period of 2 years, from 91, when Linux was first introduced, till 93, Linux had become a very important and significant product, very robust, very high quality, and the industry started looking there. And it became mainstream. So when I started studying, and that's when I started telling my story, when I started studying computer science in 1997, the internet, as well as open source software, was around. It was available. And during my studies and during the start of my professional career, I always switched between closed source software, that would be Windows for me, and using open source software. Time went by, and then at some point in 2012, I started working for a company in Zurich that was using an open source software that is used to build web pages, which is called Drupal. Has anybody heard of Drupal? Okay, thank you very much. For those of you who have not heard it, you probably heard of WordPress. Okay, it's an application that allows you to build in an easy way a website. Drupal and WordPress, you can put them in the same category of software. They allow you to build web pages, and they are both open source projects. So that meant that in my day-to-day work, working on customer projects with people that were paying money to get a website from that company, I was using open source tools. That means I had access to the source code, and I could modify it. After a couple of years, I had gotten familiar with that software, so much so that I was able in 2014 to contribute for the first time. It was a very tiny contribution. I just did a review of some problem-solving codes that was publicly available, and I went in there and I just reviewed that change, and things moved on. In the same year, I also provided some code, very small code, that solved the problem and was in the same way reviewed by other people and made it into the main Drupal system. And that's a life-changing moment for me, because in that moment I changed from being a technologist. I became and this is a very tricky statement now, I became a public servant. Because I released software to the public with the obligation or the engagement or the loose promise that I would support that change that I did, and I kept doing that, so my engagement grew with time. So the public servant term is something I came up with yesterday when I was thinking what I'm going to talk about, but I couldn't find a better way to describe when you publish, when you help, when you support the open source software. You are working in a transparent and public way. Everybody can see, everybody can criticize, everybody can benefit. And you have a loose obligation, because it's volunteer work, to support the people that use that software. So I don't know why that wouldn't be called the public servant. So in lack of a better term, I call that. The other thing that happened in that moment was, as soon as my small, humble change made it into the source code of the big project, in the eyes of lots of people that I felt were very capable, established technologists in the car, people I looked up to, and then they finally gave the okay and it went in. And in that moment I felt amazing. I felt like I had the acceptance of the community, I felt like I did a good thing, because there's also idealism there, because it's very clearly linked back to the spirit of the 70s, where you want to say, back off to the commercial companies that want to make money out of that, when my belief from the beginning was very clear that software should be readily available to anyone. So in that moment I felt like I was something special. It didn't last long, it lasted a couple of days, but then I wanted more of that. So I started contributing more, I started looking for more work that I could do. So through the years, I'll check the time quickly. So through the years, I did more of that, and I also published my own extensions to Drupal. So apart from supporting existing things and trying to fix problems and do reviews or extend the documentation, I also released functionality that wasn't there before. This, I'm going to do a very stretched link to the whole conference here, because this has elements of improvisation there. Because when you wake up in the middle of the night and you have an itch or you have an idea that you just want to create, in open source software there's a very clear path there. You can wake up the next day, write the codes and publish it. So this has no limits. This is creativity in which is self-contained, self-defined, and it may be that nobody would ever use it because it was the stupidest idea ever, or it could be that the next day you see that there's a couple of people that started using that, and that gets you even more hooked. So that worked like that for me. There was a gratification, there was a reinforcement there. Then I kept spending more time, which looked more or less like I would do my day jobs. I would walk the dog, spend time with my partner, and then in the night, not every night, but as often as I could, I would go to my computer and go online and try to figure out if there's something I can help with, or if there's something new that I can share. So that was, I don't want to say it was addictive, but it definitely kept me in a loop of satisfaction, and then I wanted more of that. And that also provided a very clear path to build my online reputation. Because this is all public. My activities in that community is all public. You can see that that's what that printout that I handed out shows. It shows a little bit of my history in that community, and that's available at any given time for me to look at. So, next to working as a development as a programmer for open source, I also did support on a questions and answer forum. It's called Stack Exchange, and it has a dedicated version for Drupal. So I went in there. There it's even worse, because you get like points, you get thumbs up, there's a gamification, so I was really wanted to play that game. So I spent even more time there. And that has brought me more or less all the way to the present. So far, that means that I've spent more than 2,000 hours doing this volunteer work for Drupal and Stack Exchange. Yesterday I checked, and the code that I have published is being used by at least 32,000 websites. It could be more, but that's the official reported statistics. And then I've answered more than 200 questions in that support forum, and I have solved more than 100 issues on the Drupal queue. And that's a lot for me in the way my life journey was happening. There's people that have done 10 or 100 times more work. So I'm not trying to say that this is big. This is relatively small, but this is my interaction with the open source community. And that has been my journey more or less. What I take out of that, and what I want to basically share with you today, is that there's a give and there's a take. And I think it's balanced. The give is very clear. It's time. Like that's a lot of time to spend, and you can spend even more. There's no barrier there. Then, of course, there is the public exposure, because it's not self-evident that each one of us is comfortable stepping up on a stage and performing while thousands or even more people are watching through the internet. It's the internet effect that makes it. It's not us. I can probably have a bit more courage to describe or share my ideas with you here. But when the whole world is watching, or that's what it feels like, you can get a little bit of a tremble in your heart because it's a lot of exposure. So that's a lot of brain power also, because it's not just time, it's not just, you don't just do something that it's brainless, it's something that oftentimes you have to think, double think, triple think, and depending on the feedback you get, you have to backtrack and try to think in a different way. Or you have to pick up ideas that are in the feedback of other people and try to make something out of that. Finally, there is the sense of responsibility, because as I said, right now I have about 32,000 users. It's a humble number, but if I do some change in the code now and I release it tomorrow, it could be that the day after, on the same day, there's going to be 30,000 websites that don't work. And I feel that that's on my side, it's my responsibility for that. So that's the give. That's the parts that are demanding and that are very also transparently obvious to me from the beginning. The take, of course, I would start with reputation because it fits into my ego. It's a selfish endeavor. I think most people that work with open source are selfish. There's something that puts them there, and it really is an opportunity to prove yourself. There's a status there. That page that goes around makes me feel good about myself because it says I've worked on 1, 10, 100, 1,000 issues. It doesn't matter. It's my status passport for that community that I interact with. So there is a clear and public and very undisputable take back, which is the reputation that's built through the years. I'm going to mention something about that at the end of these points too. The second thing is my skill set. So if you expose yourself to the public or to critique, and that's not software development alone, I think it's most things, then you get a very fast feedback cycle, and then you can really start thinking about how you do things you do. And if the feedback you get is from people that have a right way of thinking or a different way of thinking or an expanded way of thinking, this is a great opportunity to learn and to improve your skills. There's a big part that has to do with idealism, so I'm not spending my time playing computer games. I'm spending my time offering something that it may help a couple of people, and that makes me feel good. And on top of that, sometimes these people will come back and say, hey, thanks. And that would be someone that is sitting in his desk in another part of the globe. That's the internet effect. So that's very satisfactory as well. And finally, I think the thing that makes this give and take so balanced is that this reputation, I can completely use it at this point in time in a very practical way. That's when I'm looking for a job. And that has been a huge relief for me, because I don't know how often you guys look for jobs and you apply and you prepare the paperwork and you have to do interviews and you have to give your letters of credit from your previous employers. I don't have to do that anymore. All I have to do is write a couple of sentences to present myself and say that I'm enthusiastically applying for this job, and this is me. And then all I have to do is point them to my online profile. And that allows the person that evaluates my application to get a sense of how good I am, how good of a match I am for what they're looking, and it allows the technical people to go straight into the codes that I have provided and are available online, and actually see how I code, what I code, how I work through an issue, what my analytical skills are. So all this trace is very readily available in a very credible way. So that has simplified my job application process very much, and it's a very clear take because it comes with a lot of credit. I am an open source developer. Like, this is me, and I think that's why I call it balance. When I put these two things on scale, what I've given and what I've taken out, I think it's a very balanced give and take. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. And thank you very much. And if anybody has a question, I think we have a couple more minutes. I don't know what the format is of the presentation, Jonas.
I forgot.
Okay.
I don't know. We can. Yeah, if someone has a question, yeah, please feel free maybe to ask some questions now. Anyway, Stefanos will be here during the lunch break, so we have also time to exchange in a more informal way later on. But if there are no questions now, all right. I would say yeah.
I think it's really interesting what this parallelismos, this analogy you made with improvisation and like events like this one to what you are doing with the open source community, for me at least. Maybe you could talk a bit more about this analogy.
Yeah, I'm just stretching the word improvisation, and I think improvisation for me is, as I said, being awake in the middle of the night because I have that burning idea in my head and I want to see it materialized, and it has no form. It's just an idea. I have to pick it up and start bringing it to life with whatever means I have. It's a different story with programming. It's all digital. All I need is a keyboard. I don't need to do something with the real world. I don't need to go and get raw material and start working with it. So it's a thought process, but there are no rules. I'm fully free to write the code or implement the idea any way I want. So that gives me a freedom of creativity that allows me to do it in any way I want. And I think that's what I mean that it has an element of improvisation because it doesn't have a form. I can go any given way. I can just improvise and create that idea. But that's the stretch, the connection I wanted to do. As soon as I have it written down, as soon as it's working, I can share it. And then there's a different process there. Because once you share it, then you have this creative interaction with other people, which may end up giving a completely different result from what I started with. And yeah, I think in that sense that freedom, nobody knows where it's going. There's an idea, usually there's a problem. There's a problem that I want to solve. That's the beginning. I wouldn't wake up in the middle of the night because of some other reason. There's something I'm missing and I want to have it done. And I feel enabled to solve the problem. And in that aspect, I also feel enabled to share it so that it can be solved faster and better and then just be spread around. So yeah, that's the improvisation part.
Okay, thank you, Stefanos.